Okay. With that, I will call to order the August 21st, 2019 meeting of the City of Reno Capital Improvements Advisory Committee. And I believe, based on the agenda, I just have a call to order and then open it up for public comment. Michelle, do we have any public comment for this?
Not for this item, no.
Okay, then I will close public comment and move on to the public hearing, which is item 3.1, staff report for the capital improvements presentation from the Regional Transportation Commission.
Wait, we need to do roll call.
Oh,
I forgot,
well,
sorry.
that's not on my agenda here. I'm sorry.
it isn't?
That's my bad.
Oh.
Michelle, can we do roll call, please?
Yes, we can. Okay.
It's not on here either. I think that's.
So
planning
Kathleen
commission.
Taylor,
Here.
Peter Gower. Britton Griffith is absent. Ed Hawkins. John Marshall. Paula Levis.
Here.
Mark Johnson.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Would you like us to do the Pledge of Allegiance as well, Michelle?
If you would like, we can save it to the
Let's go
next
ahead and do the
meeting
Pledge
if you'd
of
like.
Allegiance led by Commissioner Hawkins, please.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we haven't had a capital improvements commission meeting in quite a while, so
Yes.
obviously
You haven't convened
we have not convened the
as-
advisory
since
committee.
late 2014.
Okay, so
So
I
it's
was a
almost
little out of
5 years.
practice. I apologize for stumbling out of the gate. With that, we will turn it over to you. Thank you.
Mike Michelle, Engineering Manager. Yes, the last time you convened on this matter was in late 2014 when you forwarded a recommendation of approval to the City Council for the 5th edition update. Now we're on the 6th edition update. We're going to follow the same process we did 5 years ago. And at the end of the presentation and public hearing, I'll ask you to do the same thing you did last time, and that is to approve a motion of approval to the City Council for this latest update to the administrative manual and the CIP and the proposed fee structure. So tonight, we have a presentation by Julie Masterpool from the RTC. But I'll just briefly say a couple of comments on the RIF program. The RIF program is governed by an interlocal agreement between both cities, the County Board of Commissioners, as well as the RTC. Each new update to the RIF requires approval from both the cities and the County Board of Supervisors. Since the inception of this program back in 1996, almost $100 million in impact fees have been collected and used to build roadway capacity improvements on our regional network. Impact fees represent new developments' fair share of the cost of roadway capacity improvements needed within the 10-year capital improvement plan in order to maintain an acceptable level of service. The Regional Road Impact Fee Technical Advisory Committee, the RIF-TAC, met on March 28th of this past year and recommended approval of the 6th edition of the RIF Administrative Manual and Capital Improvement Plan. The RIF-TAC is comprised of local government staff and planning commissioners from the local governments, as well as development representatives from the private sector and the RTC itself. So I'll turn it over to Julie for a presentation, and at the end of that and our public hearing, I'll ask you to approve the motion that's contained in the staff report.
Okay, again, for the record, Julie Masterpool, Engineering Manager with the Regional Transportation Commission and also the RIF Program Manager. And here today to present the 6th edition. There are a lot of abbreviations and acronyms that go with the RIF program. So I'm going to try and do my best to explain those as we go along, but you'll hear CIP, Capital Improvement Plan, the GAM, General Administrative Manual, VMT, Vehicle Miles Traveled. So again, I'll try and explain those as we go along. But interrupt me if something doesn't make sense as I go along. Okay, whoop. Well, let's see. Okay.
Just use the
There we
arrows.
go. Use the little roller. There we go. All new development creates additional demands on some or all of the public facilities, which are provided by local government. If capacity of those facilities aren't increased to satisfy that additional demand, quality of public services for the entire community can deteriorate. Impact fees were developed as a way to, as a funding tool to recover the cost of increasing the capacity on public facilities caused by new development. Some important points about the impact fees is that impact fees cover a specific service area to show that there's a rational nexus or a reasonable connection between the need for those facilities and new development, in addition to that the fee payer will benefit in some way from the fee that's paid. Fees are based on a list of capital improvement projects. The fees are based also on the growth within the specific service area. For the RIF program, growth is measured in vehicle miles traveled, or VMTs, which is basically the number of new trips on the regional road and the distance that they typically travel. Now, NRS allows local jurisdictions to enact an impact fee program and identifies some of the components or restrictions for the impact fees. One important one to the RIF program is that the time frame of the capital improvement plan cannot exceed 10 years. So our capital improvement plan list of projects is based on a 10-year time frame, as is the growth that we associate with the projects. Local ordinances allow the implementation on a local level, and as Mike mentioned, for our program, we have an interlocal agreement between Reno-Sparks, Washoe County, and the RTC to allow this to be a regional program so that all the fees are consistent through all three jurisdictions. We have two manuals that are associated with the program. One is the Capital Improvement Program Manual that has the list of projects, the Capital Improvement Plan, CIP, in addition to a description of the methodology used to develop that fee. And the General Administrative Manual, or the GAM, outlines the fees, how the fees are administered kind of on a day-to-day basis. As Mike also mentioned, we have a technical advisory committee that oversees the development of the fees and any questions that we have going forward. And then we have 4 RIF administrators, one with each of the local jurisdictions, and then one for the RTC. Now, the responsibilities of the Capital Improvements Advisory Committee is to review the land use assumptions that are used in developing the RIF fees, review of the capital improvement plan, that list of projects, and review the impact fees to be charged on new development, and then to advise the local governing body on adoption of the General Administrative Manual through the impact fee ordinance. To develop an impact fee, we need to determine how and where growth is anticipated to occur, and the capacity projects which are needed to accommodate that growth. And this is kind of just a flow chart, basic steps of what we go through to develop the fees. We need to know land use assumptions, which are based on the Reno, Sparks, and Washoe County master plans, and that addresses what type and where the growth is going to occur. The development of the regional transportation plan, which identifies the future capacity improvements that are needed on the regional road network, and determination of new development share cost of those capacity improvements, and finally the impact fee rates that are charged to new development and the fee schedule. Now, NRS requires that capital improvements be listed and the demand for those facilities be measured in some sort of service units, and that's what we use the vehicle miles traveled for, VMTs. And that's our standard measure to create the link between supply, the roadway capacity, and demand, the traffic that's generated by new development. VMTs are a combination of the vehicles traveling on the regional road network and the distance in miles those vehicles travel on the regional roads, excluding local roads and freeways. Land use assumptions are used in the development of the RIF fees and are based on, like I said, the master plans. That information is used in TMRPA's land development model. Population and growth from the consensus forecast is distributed throughout the Truckee Meadows based on TMRPA's land development model, which assesses the likelihood and timing of the development that's included in those master plans. Some of their suitability factors that they use are the proximity to roads and utilities, what the level of approvals are for specific projects, if they have a handbook, if they have a master plan, if they have a tentative map, what the terrain, the hydrologic features of the individual parcels, and of course the distance to downtown, regional centers, neighborhood commercial centers, and of course public facilities. And this is kind of an example. The land use that are identified, let's say in a project handbook, would yield the density or the number of homes that are included in that approval. And then the TMR model their algorithm anticipates how fast that particular project would develop as compared to other parcels and developments. Now, this information is all imported into RTC's travel demand model. Our model is used to predict the traffic volumes on the regional road network over its various time frames, and based on those land uses and development densities used in TMRPA's development model. And this helps us to determine when and where capacity improvements are needed on the regional road network. This also gives us the anticipated growth in that vehicle miles traveled, VMTs, that we anticipate over that same time frame that we're looking at for the RIF program. Now, the capacity needs identified through the travel demand model are included in the different time frames of the regional transportation plan. Near term, that first 5 years, the midterm, second 5-year time frame, and then of course the long range, 10 to 20 years. And as I mentioned earlier, NRS restricts a capital improvement plan for an impact fee program to no more than 10 years. So we use these first 2 timeframes, the short-term and midterm timeframes from the RTP, as the basis for the capital improvement plan projects in the RIF CIP. Now, NRS includes another provision that an impact fee service area cannot encompass an entire city or county if there are more than 15,000 people. So, in order to meet that requirement, we divided up our service area, the original area, into the north and south service area, the boundary being I-80. And this breaks up both Reno and Sparks so that it meets that provision. Now, this also requires that we have 2 separate and independent capital improvement plans and separate fees for the north and the south service areas. Now, this is an example of the list of projects that come out of the regional transportation plan and separated into those that occur just in the north service area, and then the total cost of those projects, in this case, it's about $428 million of all those projects. And here is an example of the south service area, and we have about $301 million of projects associated with the south. And those should be, I know it's kind of hard to see, this is a very small text, but they should be included in your packet. So, RIF fees then are based on the total cost of the capital projects listed in the CIP minus any funds that are anticipated from other funding sources. We get money from the state and from the federal government, and also we use some local funds to help build some of these capacity projects. So we take the total cost of the capital improvement plan by service area and deduct those other funding sources to get new development's fair share. Then also we have then the growth by service area that we identified through the travel demand model. In this case, this table shows that we have $103 million of new development share of the capital improvement plan for the north service area, and the growth anticipated in VMTs is $322,000. By dividing the total RIF share by the VMT growth, we get the dollar per VMT RIF share. So $320 for the North Service Area and $313 per VMT for the South. Now, here is a comparison between the 5th and the 6th editions. For the RIF share of the CIP, the 5th edition was based on the 2035 Regional Transportation Plan. The 6th edition is based on the 2040 RTP. The difference between those two plans are that some projects have been completed. They dropped off the plan for the 6th edition. Some projects were added because now we have new projects that have come into that 10-year time frame. And then there are a few projects that had rolled over that hadn't been completed from the 2035 RTP and do still show up in this first 10 years of the 2040 RTP. We also updated the cost of those projects, inflation, so we have updated the total cost of that RIF share. VMT growth, the difference between the 5th and the 6th edition is that the 5th edition was based on the 2012 consensus forecast, and the 6th edition is based on the 2016 consensus forecast. So there's a different projection over a different time frame because the previous 5th edition was a 10-year time frame. I believe it was 2014 to 2024, and the 10-year time frame we're using now is 2019 to 2029. So there's a difference in the population and employment growth. One of the things that we did also find that using TMRPA's model, we found a lot more growth predicted in the North Service Area than we had seen before in the 5th edition. So there's more growth anticipated in the North than there is in the South Service Area. Now overall, the VMT rates increased for both the North and the South Service Area in the 6th edition, a little bit more in the North than what was increased in the South. And that is basically due to those cost of the projects in the capital improvement plan. You've got more growth, you've got more capacity projects needed. Now, impact fees are paid at the building permit stage based on whatever that building permit is building. Is it a single family home? Is it office? Is it retail? So the fees are divided down into individual land uses. And the VMTs that you see here, this is kind of the most common ones that we see: single family, multifamily, retail, and lodging. So the fees are based on the average daily traffic, ADTs, based on that particular type of land use, single family homes. We use the ITE trip generation manual to determine what the trip generation is for a particular land use. And that's the same ADT that you see when a traffic study is presented with a new development. We use those same type numbers. When we updated to the 10th edition of the ITE trip generation manual, we found that while the housing trip generation actually increased a little bit, the employment was decreasing. And these are based on national studies of how many trips a type of retail actually generates. And so the ITE expanded their studies and updated all of these rates. So we did find that in some cases, the trip generation for the employment types went down, which resulted in a lower fee than the 5th edition. So on the far right-hand side, where I have the North and South, the differences between the 5th and 6th, if the number's in red, that's how much the fee decreased in the new 6th edition. Now, kind of pause here. If anybody has any questions, feel free to ask me, and then I'll move on to our general administrative manual.
Not seeing anybody jumping up with questions, so
Okay, I'll give you some more time. I've got a couple more slides.
please continue. Thank you.
Now, the General Administrative Manual provides those guidelines and procedures to administer the program. We had two notable changes, one being that state buildings are exempt from the payment of impact fees. And this is based actually on an opinion by the State Attorney General that a local jurisdiction cannot impose a fee on a state facility. This has actually been in effect since 1997, but it was just never documented into the General Administrative Manual, so we added it in so everybody knows up front that the state does not pay impact fees. Now, also, NRS exempts two other land uses from the payment of impact fees. That's public schools and also federal buildings. So state facilities are not the only ones that get exemptions. The second modification involves the timing of impact fee offset agreements. NRS also requires that if a new developer builds an improvement that was listed on the capital improvement plan that the fees are based, that we must offset their fees. The way we do that is through issuing or getting an agreement between the developer, the local agency, and RTC, and giving them impact fee waivers to offset their impact fees based on the improvements they actually build. So if they build $1 million roadway improvement, they would get $1 million in impact fee waivers to pay their impact fees. That's the only thing that can be used for, is just for the payment of impact fees. This particular provision allows a developer to start construction for a capital improvement that's going to be on the CIP when it's adopted. Due to the timing of getting these adoptions for the impact fee program, it requires going to the RTC board, presenting to all the planning commissions, 2 readings at the city councils and county commission. It takes a bit of time. And the particular projects are identified early in the process. So if a developer sees, oh, I've got that project, I'm ready to go, that he could go ahead and start construction of his project as long as he has an agreement within 12 months of beginning the construction of his project, he could earn impact fee waivers for those expenses that he has for that improvement. So with that, a little summary, and I think Mike mentioned this also, we've seen about $303 million of capacity improvements built through the impact fee program since 1996. Good portion of those have been built by new development. And that's usually just either in part of either included in their development or adjacent to their development. And it was just more convenient at the time for them to go ahead and build those improvements along with their project. And this is just I thought I'd present a quick little summary of the 5th edition capital improvement plan to kind of show you what we've accomplished over the last 5 years. So this map shows, and the list of projects shows what we've completed. Of course, the Southeast Connector. We did Southeast McCarran widening 4 to 6 lanes a couple of years ago. Some major intersection improvements, North Virginia, North McCarran, Pyramid and McCarran. We have a couple of projects that are underway. Of course, you guys all know the Virginia Street BRT is currently underway. That was on our 5th edition capital improvement plan. And then we have some multimodal projects that are in design. And we were getting ready to start the Sparks Boulevard design coming up. We have some future projects that we haven't gotten to yet, but again, that was a 10-year list of projects back in 2015. So we anticipate those might be going forward. And with that, I'll be glad to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Julie. Let me
You bet.
check. Commissioners, we have some questions for Julie. Kathleen? Commissioner Taylor?
Thank you, Julie. I have 2 questions,
Sure, great.
and you can make them as simple answers as you possibly can. The first one is the travel demand model.
Yes,
Do all of the partner agencies use the same model?
yes, we
Okay,
do.
so there's only one model for,
There is only one model that we have. I mean, it has in various 5-year increments. So there's a 2020 model, there's a 2025 model, 2030 model. On occasion, we will run special model runs. We did for the North Valleys, did a build-out model just to see what future improvements might need to be looked at without a condition of how soon they might need to be. So we do have one official model that everybody uses, but we do have special models on occasion.
and then my next question is about the waivers. So are the waivers the same as the credits?
Basically, but there are some differences. Impact fee credits were issued to developers who built those capacity improvements, and they earned credits back before the 5th edition. Those credits were associated with a benefit district, which were similar to the service areas, but north was divided into northeast and northwest. They had a lifespan of 20 years, and they could be used not only associated with the development that was built, let's say like Somerset, earned a bunch of credits for building Somerset Parkway. They could be used at 100% in Somerset Parkway, but they could also be sold to be used elsewhere in the same benefit district. But there were rules they couldn't be used for more than 50% of the payment in credits. The other 50% had to be paid in cash. So we always had some cash coming into the system. With the waivers, we changed that. Waivers are limited to the development of record only. And a developer can't earn more waivers than what he can use to pay his impact fees. So we've tightened it down a little bit so that we don't overissue credit. Well, what we did, not that we overissued credits, but it allowed somebody to build a bigger improvement than what they needed. It was a benefit to the community, but they got to choose what project went forward. And then we didn't get the cash coming in over many years because they had these excess credits. So the waiver program tends to tighten that down quite a bit. So it's limited to just the development of record. They can still be sold, but only used within that development of record. Master developer might build something and then pass it off onto the home builder to use those waivers. Does that answer a question?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Additional questions? Commissioner Gower?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had another question come to mind. So the RIF fees can be used for developing multimodal improvements like is being done on South Virginia Street.
When we calculate the fees, we do include a small portion of the cost of a multimodal project if it's not adding vehicle lanes. Because we do think that by adding BRT, by adding bike lanes and pedestrian improvements, that is still a benefit and could help reduce capacity or congestion on the road. But we've limited it to how much we say is included in the calculation for the capital improvement plan. Typically, with the amount of dollars that we're getting in for the impact fee program, we tend to save that money for projects that we can build in total with RIF fees. And for something like the BRT, which is $104 million, we haven't earned that just about in the entire 20 years that the program has been in place. So we save that for those federal dollars and state dollars for those really big projects.
Can those fees be leveraged to get the federal dollars, both in terms of the construction upfront costs and potentially to get additional funding for operational dollars? I know they can't be used. I know the Nexus isn't there for that, but are they used to say, okay, we can leverage these dollars for the implementation of the project, and then for the operational component with that type of funding, is there any sort of, advertising basically that you have these projects that are ready to go that just need the operational component to, run transit on them or?
I'll kind of answer that in two parts.
Yeah.
We can use RIF funds to match other funding. Typically with NDOT, there's a CMAQ funding we match very commonly with Congestion Mitigation Air Quality, is that acronym stands for. And we can put RIF money towards that, and that's usually a 95-5. They give us 95% CMAQ funds, and we match it with 5% RIF funds, and we did that for Evans, the bike lane on Evans. For Virginia Street BRT, there were some matching funds. I don't believe it was from the RIF category. We matched it with some other fuel tax money. So, but it can be matched.
Okay.
Now, as far as the operation, impact fees can only be used for capacity improvements, and we can't use them for maintenance or operation. So there are those limitations. And in fact, when you look at the list of projects, it's not we don't include pavement preservation in that list of projects that's in the capital improvement plan because that's not an eligible expense.
Okay,
If that makes sense.
It does. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Julie.
Commissioner
on
Marshall?
I have a number of questions, but I wanted to follow up on Commissioner Gower's questioning about, and it's interesting how you use the word capacity, because it seems like it's only capital improvements for individual person vehicle capacity. Is that
Well,
accurate?
as I mentioned, that there are some multimodal projects that are on the list, the capital improvement list, and they include bike and ped improvements and somewhat BRT. But we reduce that down to a smaller percentage of what we say of the cost of that project is eligible for RIF funds.
So but these projects reduce VMT, which is another way of addressing increases
Increase in
in
capacity.
VMT. Well,
Well,
no, it reduces the effects of development that increases VMT. And so I'm just interested in trying to understand your notion of capacity, meaning that it has to provide the physical capacity for the anticipated VMT, not other approaches that would reduce VMT so you net the same result.
basically, yes. So that we do know that by building bike lanes and building pedestrian improvements, there is a benefit to everyone. So, but we just realize that it doesn't add additional cars to that particular roadway that we're doing that multimodal improvement. So that's why we just limit the amount. We don't have the capital improvement plan have that full cost of that individual $104 million BRT. It's just a very small percentage.
I'm trying to understand why RTC caps multimodal projects so that indicating a
small-
very little amount.
And well,
what-
typically too, most of those projects are funded by those other funding source, federal dollars, state dollars, which we did. Any project that we knew up front was being funded by state and federal money, we actually took that dollar amount off of the capital improvement plan. So if you looked at the dollars associated with RIF program for the Virginia Street project, it would actually be zero in the RIF calculation because we knew that was being funded by other sources.
Are you, as a matter of law, prohibited from expending RIF money on multimodal or
No.
other projects that reduce VMT generation?
No, like Evans is a shared bike path, and we actually used RIF funds for that. So we're not limited for not using RIF funds for particular use in that regard.
So what's the policy that limits that you? It sounds like it's self-imposed then of limiting you to just a little bit of RIF funds for multimodal and other VMT reducing projects.
It's between, I guess my explanation needs to be, we could use 100% RIF money to pay for a total, let's say Audie Wells multimodal improvement project. We could use total 100% RIF funds. But when we're calculating the fee, that dollar per VMT, we just use a small percentage. And that was based on, we had a national consultant come help us develop the fee for the 5th edition. And in the past, we had only done roadway projects, capital projects. And in the 5th edition, we looked at that and said, well, we've got all these multimodal projects. How can we say that there is a benefit to the community? How can we come up with a calculation? And so it's basically, it's based on the increase in VMT over the time frame is how we get the percentage that comes up. It's a calculation that they recommended for associating RIF fees for those multimodal improvements.
I'm going to switch to other topics if
Okay.
anyone else wants to talk about this lovely. Okay, I'll take that as a. Can we just quickly go back to the travel demand model?
Okay.
Is that, and forgive my ignorance, but do you guys calibrate and validate post your estimates? You know, so you ran a model.
Were we right? Yes.
So, and what is that protocol? I mean, what do you use? Traffic counts or?
Actual traffic counts, yes. They go through, and I know that they validate it with all the 2015. NDOT does many traffic counts all over, not just on their facilities, but also on regional roads. And so we run our model and then compare it to the 2015 counts from NDOT. And then when we're kind of in between years, we gauge it and look at, because NDOT updates their calculations or their traffic counts annually. And so we'll go in and see what our model would have said versus what NDOT does. So we do try and calibrate it on a regular basis.
Thank you. All VMT or all projects are not VMT equal. So you can have a project that's way up in the North Valleys or way down south, and that's going to generate probably more vehicle miles trip per unit than a unit that's bikeable, walkable within a urban center, but yet they're still, it looks like they're paying the same RIF fee. Is that true?
That is true. The impact fee program does not take into account necessarily how far that development is from, let's say, downtown Reno. So it just says the average trip length and the average number of trips generated by a particular development, whether it's in North Valleys, South Valleys, and the heart of Reno pays the same fee.
So by that averaging, you are essentially subsidizing development out in the hinterlands with payments by development within the urban core. Is that accurate?
Well, the one thing that the urban core gets the benefit of is if someone redevelops a parcel, they get the benefit of what the trip generations were for the previous land use.
They
So-
calculate that into their base, so it's not on a, it's actually, they actually base it on their VMT generated, or they get to use they're not creating new units necessarily, they may be redeveloping.
Right.
Commercial
So if,
floor
you know,
area.
the simple one, if you tear down a house and you build a new house, you would pay no new impact fee.
But if I'm doing an infill development of densifying, I pay for those units at the
The
same rate,
increase.
even though they're generating less VMT than someone up in North Valleys, for example.
Correct. At this time, you would.
Why is that?
We tried to look at a way to change our service areas to accommodate that. And at the time, between our board and the fifth edition is when we really took a hard look at how to define service areas. We came up with just that redevelopment. So if you are tearing something down, you get the benefit of what was there. But we don't have the benefit of, if you build in downtown and you're walkable, will you generate less trips? We haven't been able to come up with the best way to handle that yet.
Is there
That could be
any-
something we could address again in the seventh edition and try and look at another alternative on the way to calculate that. But
Is
it's hard to
there-
determine let's say within the urban area, do you generate less trips necessarily? You know, I live out in Sparks and I come into downtown. So am I still doing a long trip even though there's something in downtown that I'm using? So I know there are a lot of people that live outside of downtown that commute in. So how do you accommodate for those trips also? That was kind of the challenge that comes up with giving a core, the inner core, some kind of a discount.
Okay, let me just quickly look at my list. I take it then that I also you've already answered that question. I'll stop beating a dead horse, but save it for comments. Thank you. That's all I have.
Okay, thanks.
If I could just add, Arla Stockham, Community Development Director, we're engaging more actively leading into the upcoming Regional Transportation Plan update. And we've been meeting with RTC staff to explore ways to do just what you suggest and have some form of fee structure that maybe reflects or incentivizes infill development and reflects that it doesn't generate as much VMT. This process has, It's kind of at the tail end of the process, so it's hard to insert that into there now. But we're working pretty actively to see if there's a different arrangement for the next update that could better support infill development and our citywide goals.
Thanks, Arlo. Any additional questions? Commissioner Hawkins?
Julie, right now, DR Horton's putting in a acceleration lane from Silver Dollar Trading Post area up about 200 feet going toward Walmart. Are they going to get credits for that or a waiver?
If it's related to their development, they need a right turn lane into their development. No, they would not. Now for Sky Vista, also, I'll bring that up, is that we've had, some recent developers that are in the process or have built a lot of apartments and some housing that are going up there. And Sky Vista widening was on the capital improvement plan for the 6th edition, and we are going forward. RTC is going forward to look at the widening for that segment of Sky Vista. Actually, it's looking at it from Lemon all the way out to Silver Knolls, I believe.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioners, any additional questions or comments, or we have a motion to move this forward? So, Commissioner Gower?
Mr. Chairman, I'm ready to make a motion. I do want to say before I make it that I do agree with Commissioner Marshall's questions, and I know that it came up at the RIFTAC meetings, the discussion of kind of the geographic pros and cons, I guess, or plus and minuses of VMT generation, and I wasn't able to attend the kind of the second sets of meetings for the RIFTAC, so I don't really know where those discussions ended up. But that is an important part of the equation, that units or uses in certain areas generate more VMTs than other based on their proximity to, amenities and other modes of transportation. So not only incentivizing infill development, but disincentivizing development in other areas by potentially increasing the RIF fees, I think is something that might be worth exploring. Given that, I think we're in a position where the TAC has this recommendation to us. We need to move it forward to advance through the CIP. I do think that, as the city has their master plan in place, we have the zoning code update in place, those pieces are kind of falling into place. So with the next update of the RIFTAC, that we'll be ready to have an educated conversation about what this looks like and how we might be able to make those adjustments that Commissioner Marshall is talking about. So with that, I move that the Capital Improvements Advisory Committee recommend approval to City Council to adopt the 6th edition of the Regional Road Impact Fee, General Administrative Manual, and the CIP and revised fees for the City of Reno, as outlined in the staff report.
Thank you, Commissioner Gower.
I'll second his motion.
I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion, Commissioner Marshall?
Because of comments of Commissioner Gower and my line of questioning, I'll be voting no on the motion. I'd just like to explain my basis for doing so, and that's primarily because of the subsidy that close-in development, less VMT generating development is subsidizing the impacts of development outside, particularly the American Ring, particularly in farther flung areas, and that hides the true cost of that development, and it burdens the development that we'd like to see that's promoted by our new master plan. It also, I think, is inconsistent with, we're balancing on the cusp of our ozone non-attainment, and that really drives, can drive us towards growth that will probably maybe push us into non-attainment, which I think will come with its own consequences. Excuse me. For those reasons, I'll be voting no.
Thank you, Commissioner Marshall. Any additional comments? That I have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
No.
Thank you. Motion to recommend the city council passes with 5 votes in favor and 1 vote opposed from Commissioner Marshall. Thank you. Julie, Michael, thank you very much. Excellent presentation. Next on the Capital Improvements Advisory Committee agenda is public comment. Michelle, do we have any requests to speak forms under this item?
No, not on this item.
Okay. With that, I am going to adjourn or ask for a motion for adjournment of the Capital Improvements Advisory Committee and then take a 5-minute break as we prepare to start the Planning Commission meeting.
Move to adjourn.
Motion. Motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Okay, we will reconvene the Planning Commission meeting at 5 minutes to 6.